The second generation Lexus IS is an oft-forgotten but actually very appealing choice in the BMW 3 Series and Audi A4 dominated compact executive saloon sector. But where an entry-level version of one of those cars might feel rather cheap, any IS really does offer large luxury virtues in a more compactly sensible package that in this improved version features sharper looks and lower running costs. So you want a compact executive saloon, something like a BMW 3 Series, an Audi A4 or a Mercedes C-Class. But you're fed up with these typical German alternatives and you want something that's equally stylish and prestigious, but just that little bit more exclusive and different. For you, on paper at least, this Lexus IS really ought to be the default choice. It's beautifully styled, robustly built, flawlessly reliable and backed by a dealer network that's routinely steeped in praise by every customer satisfaction survey going. But if all of that is true, then why hasn't this second generation IS model launched in 2005 made more of an impact? Is it merely a second tier operator destined forever to gaze longingly up at the top table of this segment with assorted Volvos, Volkswagens and Saabs? Or is the truth that this Lexus IS remains this market's best kept secret, a car that would be capable of breaking the BMW 3 Series, Audi A4 and Mercedes C-Class monopoly if only more people knew about it? That's what we're here to find out. The Japanese brand has certainly tried very hard to put its product on the map, but you can't help wondering whether the effort has always been channeled in the right directions. So there are two smart but minority interest halo models, the V8 powered ISF Super Saloon and the pretty IS 250C convertible, but nothing in the way of the kind of coupe and estate body styles that competitors offer. There's limited engine choice too, with only single petrol and diesel choices at mainstream level. But Lexus is determined to make the most of what it has, hence a far-reaching package of changes introduced at the end of 2010 that has brought us the smarter, cleaner and more cost-effective car that we're looking at here, which is timely given that these days IS customers may also be tempted to consider Lexus's other relatively affordable offering, the hybrid-powered CT200H. So does this car still represent a sensible choice for those looking at prestige in a compact package? Let's find out. Now, climb into an IS and you feel like you're climbing into a £20,000 to £30,000 car, which isn't always the case when you're shopping at the bottom end of the compact executive sector. That's very Lexus-like, but the diesel rumble you get after pressing the large start button in this IS 200D very definitely isn't. You expect a V6 petrol purr when you start up a Lexus, even a hybrid one. Indeed, that's exactly what you get in my favourite IS model, the IS 250, with its 205 brake horsepower, 2.5 litre V6, matched to one of the world's smoothest automatic gearboxes. In this IS 200D diesel variant, though, you must trade those virtues for those of an engine originally developed for Toyota's Avensis and Verso models. So perhaps not surprisingly, it's not quite as refined as you'd hope, but it's certainly an engine that's restrained enough for comfortable high-speed cruising. Now, in order to improve economy and emissions, power of this diesel unit has been cut from 175 to 148 brake horsepower, so there's slightly less pulling power than there used to be in this variant, 340 newton meters rather than 400 newton meters. But that's still enough for this car to get from rest to 60 in 10.2 seconds on the way to a top speed of 127 miles an hour, which is about as fast as most buyers of cars of this kind will want to go. Now, that's a performance return very similar to that of Lexus's other relatively affordable offering, the hybrid petrol-powered CT200H, which costs around about the same as this IS 200D. It'll be interesting to see which buyers prefer. If you can cope with the higher running costs, of the petrol IS250 model, then rest to 60 takes 8.5 seconds on the way to 140 miles an hour, though it is a unit that has to be worked hard to deliver its best performance. It's the same engine also that's used in the IS250C convertible, though that car's extra weight means that it is slightly slower. Rest to 60 there takes 9.5 seconds on the way to 130 miles an hour. The V8 powered ISF 5-litre Super Saloon, in contrast, storms through the 60 barrier in just 4.8 seconds on the way to a top speed of 168 miles an hour. So, V8 power aside, there are just single petrol and single diesel engine options. It's not quite the kind of choice you expect from this class of car, but fortunately this IS does have more definite appeal in other areas. Fast steering and limpet-like grip make it a fine machine to hurry along in, although it's a pity that diesel drivers don't get an automatic gearbox option. The multi-link suspension, especially in F-Sport trimmed models like this one, is rather firm though, and you feel that on poorer surfaces at low speeds. As for refinement, well, aside from the diesel rumble, it's impressive, and the IS250 petrol variant is class-leadingly outstanding in the excellent peace and quiet that you get in its cabin. On a miserable, wet, rainy day like this, it'd be quite cheering to open the bedroom curtains and see one of these parked in your driveway. This, after all, remains a very good-looking car, and a rather uniquely styled one. Try imagining it wearing BMW or Audi badges. It's quite impossible. Now, more recent second-generation IS models like this one have some slight, subtle styling tweaks. There are tweaked rear lamp clusters, smarter high-intensity discharge headlamps with trendy daytime running lights along the bottom, flanking a smarter, sleeker front grille. And on F-Sport models like this one, you get an even more dynamic body kit. Otherwise, the L-Finesse design language that this car started out with back in 2005 remains pretty much intact. It's a taut, muscular looking design with origami sharp swage lines and very painstakingly finished attention to detail. It's also beautifully built. The gap between the bumpers and the adjacent bodywork, for example, is just 0.35 millimeters. Inside, the interior is also beautifully constructed, mixing leather, plastic, brushed aluminium, chrome, even wood if you specified it, with customary Lexus quality. Now, some of the materials don't have quite the luxurious feel that you'd find on German rivals, but there's never any doubt that it'll all stand the test of time. Technophobes will welcome the absence of complex computer control interfaces. Instead, there's just this easy-to-use colour touchscreen, and everything falls beautifully to hand. Though it's easy to get comfortable in front, rear seat passenger space is at much more of a premium. But then this isn't a class of car noted for looking after rear seat occupants. You won't be wanting to carry more than a couple of adults back here. The 378-litre boot isn't huge either, and the only way of extending it is via the ski hatch, but it's pretty much the sort of size you'd expect from this class of car. Now, most Lexus IS sales are made in the £25,000 to £32,000 bracket for mainstream IS200D and IS250 variants. You're looking at somewhere in the £37,000 to £47,000 bracket if you want an IS250C convertible, and you'll need to budget well over £55,000 for the tyre shredding performance of the V8 powered ISF Super Saloon. Now, we're concentrating here on the mainstream IS200D and IS250 saloon variants, and here you're in a rather unusual situation where it's actually cheaper to buy the diesel alternative. There's a £1,200 premium to go from an IS200D to a comparably equipped IS250 petrol model. Though, of course, in this case, drinking from the black pump does give you quite a lot less power. Now, comparisons with rivals need to be done carefully, since some German alternatives can match this Lexus's performance with smaller, less powerful engines. But in the case of this IS200D diesel variant, there isn't a great deal in it. and it manages to undercut most of its main competitors on price. So a comparable Audi A4 2-litre TDI 136 PS model will cost you a couple of £100 more. A comparable BMW 318D ES will cost you about £400 more, and a comparable Mercedes C200 CDI diesel will put you back about £1,400 more. And in every case, those German rivals have less equipment than this Lexus offers. Now, when it comes to the petrol-powered IS250 model, it doesn't look quite as good on paper against German rivals. It'll cost you about the same as the comparable Mercedes and a little bit more than equivalent BMW 3 Series and Audi A4 models. But like its diesel stablemate, it is better equipped and it does feel that bit more exclusive. Before Lexus arrived in this sector, buyers of compact executive saloons had to choose either to go for a premium brand with Spartan equipment levels, or get more equipment from a lesser manufacturer but put up with a lesser badge on the bonnet and the lower residuals that came with it. Now, this IS changed all of that, equipped to the kind of standard that made the spec levels provided by German competitors look, frankly, rather embarrassing. The differences aren't quite as great these days, but they're still significant. Whichever IS model you choose, this diesel IS 200D with 148 brake horsepower, or the petrol IS 250 with 205 brake horsepower from its 2.5 litre V6, you'll find equipment levels that mean you don't have to resort to the options list to spoil yourself. So all models come with a 8-speaker CD stereo with a USB port and AUX connectivity, Bluetooth, alloy wheels, and a high standard of climate control. Now here I've opted for the more dynamic looking F-Sport trim level that'll fool even knowledgeable neighbours into thinking that you've somehow persuaded your company to let you have the ISF Super Saloon. It looks even more dynamic these days thanks to redesigned front and rear spoilers and smarter wheels, plus a leather and Alcantara trimmed cabin with sport steering wheel, gear knob and pedals that feels very special indeed. But whichever IS variant you choose, you should find that safety is well covered, with at least 8 airbags and a whole host of the latest electronic braking, stability and traction control systems overseen by Lexus's clever and very advanced VDIM, Vehicle Integrated Dynamic Management, Handling and Safety System. Security is well covered too, Lexus having been the first manufacturer to score a perfect 100% score on What Car Magazine's Security Super Test. When this second generation IS was first introduced, Lexus gave in to the inevitable and introduced a diesel alternative. Now, to begin with, we got an IS 220D model that compensated for the extra weight it had to carry over BMW 3 Series and Audi A4 style rivals, about 200 kilograms, by offering slightly more power in its original form than comparable versions of either of those cars. But today, the Japanese brand has abandoned that approach in favour of one solely focused on improving the all-important running costs upon which today so many executive decisions are based. So, although power is down to 148 brake horsepower, fuel consumption and emissions figures are 10% better. So you'll get about 55.4 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle from an IS 200D and put out 134 grams per kilometre of CO2. That means that vehicle excise duty drops from band F to band E, and there's a benefit in kind rating reduced from 21 to 18%. You could go just as fast and slightly better all these figures in a BMW 318D, say, or an Audi A4 2-litre TDI 136 PS, but they represent Lexus's best stab yet at satisfying the balance sheet needs of customers in this market. That's, of course, if you don't take into account the petrol hybrid charms of the marque's actually quite appealing CT200H model, which, for the same kind of money as this Lexus IS 200D diesel, offers us similar sort of performance, nearly 70 miles to the gallon and under 100 grams per kilometre of CO2. But some will feel that it doesn't have quite the class of this IS. It'll be interesting to see how sales pan out. Of course, if running costs aren't everything, then you'll be free of having to consider either diesel or hybrid Lexus options, and you can simply get on with enjoying the IS in its most charming form, equipped with a super smooth 2.5 litre V6 petrol engine in IS 250 form. Now, this unit isn't the most efficient of its kind, but it is slightly greener than it used to be, managing 33.6 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and putting out 194 grams per kilometre of CO2. The same engine is used in the IS 250C convertible, but that car is slightly heavier, so the figures fall to 30.7 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 213 grams per kilometre of CO2. That only leaves the 5 litre V8 powered ISF Super Saloon. Nobody's idea of an eco-friendly choice, but it too is slightly more efficient than it used to be, managing 24.4 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and putting out 270 grams per kilometre of CO2. Insurance groups, well, they range between 24 and 30 for mainstream saloon models, rising to 31 for the IS 250C convertible and 43 for the ISF V8 Super Saloon. Residual values, well, they're pretty close to those of the established German brands. It's certainly easy to overlook the Lexus IS in a market dominated by BMW, Audi and Mercedes, but this car definitely deserves more attention than it sometimes gets. Perhaps it can't quite eclipse its big-hitting Teutonic rivals in every area, but the fact that it isn't German will be enough to convince many weary execs yearning for a change. Despite the recent welcome improvements to running costs, this still isn't a car that jumps out at you from the spec sheet. But then, it never was. Other rivals have always shaded it in terms of performance and efficiency. What's important now, though, is that the differences are no longer as great as once they were. And if you can overlook them, this car offers in return more luxury, better value, and a rather uniquely exclusive feel. Everything, in other words, you would expect from a Lexus.